Hello, March for Life, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a wonderful guest for all of you. Um, Dr. Michael New, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me.
Dr. Michael New is a visiting assistant professor of political science and social research at the Catholic University of America, as well as an associate scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Additionally, he's a fellow at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey. Dr. New has both a PhD in political science and a master's degree in statistics from Stanford University. He's served as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard MIT Data Center and a lecturer at the University of Massachusetts. His articles have appeared in various peer-reviewed journals, 3 of which have examined the impact of state-level abortion legislation. It's quite a resume, Dr. New.
Thanks for the kind words.
Yeah, well, thank you just again so much for joining us. I'm really excited for our discussion today about the lasting impact of the pro-life movement. Your articles on this and your research have been invaluable to the March for Life's own efforts, and it really is just invaluable information, I think, to the movement at large.
No, appreciate that. One thing I've tried to work on is kind of the whole social science of the pro-life movement. I got my PhD, and I think we'll talk about my story later on, but I realized that the pro-life movement didn't really have anybody working on things like abortion trends, pro-life laws, public opinion, contraception programs, and it's a lot to write about, a lot to comment on, and I'm happy to take on this role. So thank you for your kind words.
Well, just hopping right in here, Dr. New, you're one of the leading scholars in the pro-life movement, providing insight into the impact of state-level abortion legislation to topics more timely, such as COVID-19's effect on abortion. What originally drove you to this area of study, and what value do you believe it brings to the pro-life movement?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question. There was never really a plan for me to do, kind of social science research that was of interest to pro-lifers. I kind of stumbled on this almost partly by accident. My doctoral dissertation as a graduate student at Stanford dealt with state level budget rules and fiscal limits. And one thing I noticed in my research is that we had a big tax revolt in the 1970s, and that inspired a lot of states to try to put various budget rules and fiscal limits in place, either cut taxes, cut spending, or limit the growth of government. And one thing that I found out is that most of these limits just didn't do a lot of long-term good. They might have done a little bit of good in the short term, but they weren't terribly effective long-term. And that kind of got the wheels in my head turning. I was kind of hoping that, that pro-lifers are out there working hard, passing these incremental laws, are any of these laws doing good? And at the time, I really didn't know the answer to that question. But out of background in statistics, a background in state politics, I thought to myself, this is something I could answer on my own. So after I wrapped up at Stanford, I spent 2 years in Boston. I had a research job at the Harvard MIT Data Center, and I also taught adjunct at UMass Boston. And my job at Harvard gave me some time for my own research. So one project I started was trying to gauge the impact of state-level pro-life laws. And it was interesting. At the time, there wasn't a lot of research. And one of the reasons why is because it was very difficult to get a good data set of what states had passed what laws at what time. So even though lots of states are doing things, at that time, the only group that was really tracking this in a consistent way was NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action. Now we have AUL, does their great publication Defend Life, and there's some other groups that do some good state-level work. But in 2002, 2003, we didn't really have much. And I kind of kept stalling out because I couldn't get a data set of what states had passed what laws at what time. NARAL was the only group that tracked this. They have a publication called Who Decides, lists all the states and all the pro-life laws they passed that year. And obviously, NARAL wasn't going to give me their data. They didn't really post archives online. Not even the Library of Congress had a complete set of these Who Decides booklets. And then I found out in a very roundabout way that NARAL actually willed away some of their archives to the Women's Library at Harvard University. So it was all right there waiting for me. I filled out some paperwork, got to go to a room. These boxes were there. I was able to sift through them, and it got me started on this research. And I did a study. I guess I got some preliminary results out by January of 2003. I was hoping to get something out by the 30th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. I wasn't really plugged in. I did try to circulate amongst some friends of mine. Got kind of a lukewarm response. And then I was actually very lucky that Harvard, where I was at, had a visiting fellow program. And one of the fellows that spring was a guy named Stuart Butler, who at the time was the vice president of domestic policy at the Heritage Foundation. And he did this weekly seminar on health policy and healthcare reform. And I popped in and got to know Stuart a bit, and we had lunch. I pitched him the idea, would Heritage be interested in doing a study on the impact of pro-life laws? And he was intrigued, but Heritage at the time focused on domestic issues and fiscal policy and foreign policy. They didn't really do much on social policy. So people were intrigued but skeptical. So they really want to make sure if we do a study on abortion, it has to be absolutely airtight. So that summer, they had an intern reconstruct my whole data set from scratch. Over 20 years of data, nearly all 50 states, economic variables, demographic variables. This person did find a few minor errors, but nothing that changed my results. The study came out January of 2004. I think it came out the day of the March for Life. It did show that a lot of incremental pro-life laws were effective. Things like public funding limits, things like parental involvement laws, things like informed consent laws, and it got a nice response. At the time, I kind of thought the pro-life movement would come along, pat me on my head, thank me for the study, tell me what a nice guy I was, and that would be it. Didn't quite work out that way. People were very excited about the study. It got a fair amount of attention. I was getting requests to research other things. I was getting requests to, offer some commentaries, critiques of other studies that were out there. And it became a college industry. I'm like, wait a second, the pro-life movement doesn't really have their own kind of in-house social scientists. This is a role you can fill. So I just threw over my shoulder and moved forward. And I've done writing and research on abortion trends, public opinion, contraception programs, pro-life laws, and it's been a fruitful research agenda. And I'm happy to do this.
I feel like every single time I'm researching a different topic in the pro-life movement, I'm seeing your name pop up into every single area.
So there's a lot to write about. So again, if you work for the pro-life movement, you'll never be bored. I can promise you.
That's very true. So the pro-life movement has been working to build a culture of life in America for nearly 5 decades. We've been creating ministries for women facing unexpected pregnancies, lobbying for pro-life legislation on both the state and national level. And everyone marches annually in DC, calling for an overturning of Roe v. Wade. But in this fight for life, you can often see pro-lifers growing weary. What encouragement can your research give to these pro-lifers?
It's true that, for 47 years, we've been trying to overturn Roe v. Wade. And, I think when Roe v. Wade was handed down in 1973, I don't think really anybody active in the pro-life movement at that time thought 47 years later, we still would have Roe v. Wade on the books. But one thing I always try to tell pro-life audiences every time I get a chance is that we are making progress. And the best evidence of that progress is that we've made a lot of progress getting the abortion rate down. After Roe v. Wade, the abortion rate went up. It peaked in 1980, and it's fallen just about every year since then. The abortion rate has fallen by about 50% since 1980. And if you could just even show the slide I included in my presentation, people are curious. Again, you see the numbers go up after Roe v. Wade. They peak in 1980. And they've fallen ever since. Again, you've seen a decline of greater than 50% in less than 40 years. And the abortion rate today is actually lower than it was when Roe v. Wade was decided back in 1973. So again, I really think that declining abortion rates is something we should talk about more, and it should just get more attention. I mean, usually when there's a big public policy success story, it gets attention. We see the media talk about things like declining crime rates. We saw a lot of media attention, obviously, when communism fell. We saw a lot of media attention for things like declines in the teen pregnancy rate. Here we've made quite a lot of progress getting abortion numbers down. It gets very little attention. So I think that, again, even though we've not succeeded in overturning Roe v. Wade, we've been successful in other ways. The fact that the abortion rate's fallen by 50% really shows I think pro-life efforts have been effective.
Thank you for that. Also, several of your articles highlight that a higher percentage of unintended pregnancies are being carried to term. What can you explain about the cultural importance to this data?
Yeah, sure. So an important thing to consider is not only that abortion numbers are falling, but why they're falling. And even our opponents will concede abortion numbers are going down. I mean, both they from the CDC and Guttmacher clearly show a consistent downward trend in the abortion rate. But our opponents will typically bend over backwards to avoid giving us any credit. And one thing they'll often say is, sure, abortion numbers are falling, but that's because of contraception use. And because more women are using contraception, and therefore we should distribute contraception, subsidize contraception, fund contraception programs. But there's really not much evidence suggesting that really contraception use is really why abortion numbers are falling. Our opponents are correct that by some metrics, contraception use has increased since the early 80s. But if our opponents were correct, you would see a decline, or at least a consistent decline, in the unintended pregnancy rate, and you don't see that. So if you bring up that second chart there that I sent along, if you look at the unintended pregnancy rate since the early 80s, you see fluctuation. I mean, you see a consistent decline in the abortion rate. When it comes to the unintended pregnancy rate, you see fluctuation. You actually see the unintended pregnancy rate increase between 2001, 2008. And again, this is a chart put out by Guttmacher up until 2006, 2007. They were Planned Parenthood's research arm. This is a group not sympathetic to pro-lifers. So again, you don't see the consistent decline in the unintended pregnancy rate that you do in the abortion rate. So it's not that unintended pregnancies aren't happening. They are happening. What you do see happening is that a higher percentage of unintended pregnancies are being carried to term. And that's an important statistic to bring up, that when a woman does face an unplanned pregnancy, nowadays, she's a lot more likely to carry that pregnancy to term. If you bring up the third chart, we can show the latest data on that to the audience, that back in 1994, 54% of unintended pregnancies were aborted. That fell to 40% by 2008. And some preliminary data suggests it's as low as 29% by 2014. So again, when women do find themselves with unplanned pregnancy, they're more and more likely to choose life. And the reason why I mention this to pro-life audiences as often as I can is because if more unintended pregnancies are carried to term, that shows that pro-life efforts are effective. That if more and more women are choosing life, that means that pro-life has succeeded in doing one of three things. We've either changed hearts and minds, persuaded people, we're taking better care of pregnant women through pregnancy help centers, or we're passing protective laws, or we're doing some combination of those three things. So if more unintended pregnancies are being carried to term, it all flows back to the activities and actions of pro-lifers, where, again, changing hearts and minds, shifting public opinion, we're doing a better job taking care of pregnant women through our pregnancy help centers, or we're passing protective laws. And we've made progress kind of on each of these metrics during the past 40 years. As recently as 1995, only 33% of people identified as pro-life according to Gallup. That figures up to 49% now. So if you look at the pro-life, pro-choice polls, we've made quite a lot of progress since the early 90s. A higher percentage of Americans identify as pro-life. As far as pregnancy help centers, according to Heartbeat International, since, 1988, the number of organizations devoted to assisting pregnant women has increased by over 80%. So you see in a lot of states, there's more and more alternatives and options for women who want to carry pregnancies to term. We're doing a good job meeting the material needs, helping them with shelter, with counseling, with medical care. And we're passing a lot more laws. The number of states passing parental involvement laws, informed consent laws, and 20-week abortion bans has gone up dramatically. So shifting public opinion, helping pregnant women, passing protective laws, these are all areas where we've made quite a lot of progress during the past 40 years.
No, that's very encouraging to see.
Mm-hmm.
So much of your research also examines the impact of state-level abortion legislation.
Mm-hmm.
In recent years, it seems like the pro-life movement has been working hard to promote this pro-life legislation within their individual states. The March for Life, similarly, has even been expanding our own state march program.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it's so important for the movement to push for legislation on the state level?
I think there's a lot of reasons. First, there's a good body of research showing that state-level pro-life laws save lives. There's a lot of research showing that if Medicaid programs in states don't pay for elective abortions, abortion rates go down. There's good research showing that parental involvement laws reduce minor abortion rates. Things like informed consent laws, when they're well designed, they reduce abortion rates. So giving women seeking abortions information about alternatives, about things like field development, about potential health risks of abortion, about public and private sources of support for pregnant women. Again, these informed consent laws, when they're well designed and properly designed and enforced, they save lives. That's one thing. Another reason is that even, the pro-life laws, especially incremental pro-life laws, I think serve a very important educational purpose. A lot of people don't really realize how permissive abortion policy is in America. A lot of people don't know that Roe v. Wade, for all intents and purposes, legalized abortion throughout all 9 months of pregnancy in all 50 states. So some people aren't aware that women can get abortions in the third trimester. And a lot of these incremental pro-life laws kind of highlight, I think, the extreme nature of abortion policies we have in this country. So I think they serve a powerful educational purpose. And also, again, we don't know how the Supreme Court's going to rule in any future case. We don't necessarily know if Roe v. Wade will be overturned, but there's a good chance, I think, with the current composition of the Supreme Court, they are going to let states do more to regulate abortion and let states do more than they currently can do to protect the preborn. So essentially, even if Roe v. Wade's overturned, it's going to be battles at the state level. And we need to be prepared. So essentially, I think these incremental laws are kind of a good test run to allow us to pave the way for a future where we can do more. It's not going to be easy. Even conservative states are getting pushed back. Passing laws is never easy. Our system of government's kind of designed to work slowly. There's lots of gatekeepers we have to kind of get through sometimes. But I think that again, that's a lot of the future battles are going to be fought at the state level, and I think that these efforts to pass state level pro-life laws, I think, will make us more effective in the long run.
So, within the coming years, which states do you think are the most important to be paying attention to?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I'm going to dodge your question a bit and just say I think it's kind of all states we need to really be paying attention to. I think that if you look at the polling data, even incremental pro-life laws tend to poll well, even in quote unquote blue states. Even in liberal states, people don't like late-term abortions. Even in liberal states, parental involvement laws are supported. And I think we also kind of have to be careful about and kind of be a little proactive in quote unquote politically liberal parts of the country. That you do see situations where they're trying to repeal some of the state level pro-life laws. That if you look at the states that were kind of most active in the 80s, Massachusetts was one of the first states to pass parental involvement, interestingly. Rhode Island passed a pro-life parental involvement law in the early 80s. These laws are in jeopardy right now. The Democratic Party has really shifted to the left on sanctity of life issues. They're no longer happy with the status quo. They're trying to repeal parental involvement laws in some states. They're trying to require the state Medicaid programs cover abortion. So I think the pro-lifers need to be kind of active and engaged in these blue states and try to make sure that, things, even though I think I'm optimistic about the future in general, I think that in blue states, we have to play defense and be smart and protect the gains that we have in fact made.
Thank you. In your opinion, what has been the most impactful effort of the pro-life movement in these past 5 decades?
I think the best thing we've done as far as just saving lives is the Hyde Amendment. I think that when the Roe v. Wade was handed down, I think we realized that we weren't necessarily going to be able to overturn it in the short term, but we could at least protect taxpayers. We could at least protect people's conscience rights. And we could get the federal government at least mostly out of the business of funding elective abortions. And Henry Hyde back in 1976 showed a lot of leadership. The Hyde Amendment has to be passed every year. It's a rider to the appropriations bill that funds health and human services. And what it does, it basically states that federal taxpayer dollars won't fund elective abortions through the Medicaid program. And it's been passed pretty much every year since 1976. It was one of our first political victories. The Supreme Court upheld the Hyde Amendment in Harris v. McRae in 1980. That was one of our first kind of legal victories after Roe v. Wade. And there's just a very good body of research showing the Hyde Amendment has saved millions of lives, literally. Even our opponents agree. Center for Reproductive Rights did a study in 2010 or an analysis. They said the Hyde Amendment has saved over 1 million lives. I did a study on the 40th anniversary of the Hyde Amendment in 2016. I found it saved over 2 million lives. Guttmacher, which again tries to play down the impact of pro-life laws, their own analysis shows that it stops about 30,000 abortions every year. So please don't let people tell you that our political efforts are in vain. There's millions of people out there walking around today who owe their life to the Hyde Amendment. So by getting the federal government largely out of the business of funding elective abortions, we have made progress. We've saved lives. And again, our efforts have made a real impact in the lives of millions of Americans.
If our viewers walk away with one primary message today, what would you like it to be?
Mostly that essentially we have made progress. I know it's a cliche, but it's something I keep telling pro-life audiences that, we're all in this for the long term. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to be able to end abortion tomorrow. And we're going to have our ups and downs. The Supreme Court's reviewing an important case right now, June Medical Services versus Russo. I'm hoping they'll rule in favor of those pro-life laws in Louisiana. We don't know how they're going to rule. Obviously, I think I've heard some rumors about a presidential election coming up. The elections are important. We don't necessarily know who's going to win. But even if we don't get the ruling we want from the Supreme Court, even if the elections don't go the way pro-lifers don't, I don't want people to despair. Yeah, be disappointed, but I'm giving people an hour. After an hour, quit being disappointed. Get back to work. We have to build a culture of life. We're not always going to win every election, from now until kingdom come. We're not necessarily going to get the Supreme Court to rule the way we want to. We're doing this kind of long term. We'll have some setbacks along the way. That's to be expected, but just keep heart. We are making progress. We are changing hearts and minds. We are passing protective laws. We are helping women through pregnancy help centers. So we shouldn't be discouraged by short-term setbacks. We need to be in this for the long haul and keep building a culture of life.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. New. And lastly, where can our viewers find your work and how can they best follow you on social media?
Best way to follow me on social media is through Twitter. I can be reached on Twitter. I'm at Michael, Michael _J. _new NEW. That's at Michael MICHAEL _J _new NEW. March for Life was nice enough to tweet an announcement about this presentation that includes my Twitter handle. So just follow this. You can click on that link and follow me. You can also friend me on Facebook. I post my articles whenever I write something or some analysis. I always post it on my Twitter feed, and I always post it on Facebook. So those are the two best ways to get a hold of me. So I'm always happy to engage people on Facebook and on Twitter, and that's the best way one can follow my writing and my research.
And I definitely encourage all of our followers to go follow Dr. Michael New. His research is just phenomenal. It really does touch upon almost every issue in the pro-life movement and gives a very in-depth analysis, but I would always say very easily consumable as well.
Well, thanks. Appreciate the kind words.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr.
No, it's a privilege. And March for Life's doing terrific work. We're in DC every January. I always say I'm at the march every year. I always tell people, look for me. I'm the guy with the pro-life sign. Easiest spot.
Best joke we hear every year.
Yep.
Yeah, well, have a wonderful rest of your day. Best of luck with teaching your classes while still online. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the weeks and months to come.
Yep, looking forward to it. I'm going to keep writing and keep researching, so I'll pass it along.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone who tuned in today. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.